Let's see. So can everyone see Geshe and myself clearly? All right. And could you hear both of us okay?
Yep.
All right. Well,
so
Ale, Geshe thinks I need another cushion. He thinks my head is too close to the bottom. Just a moment. Yeah.
And
How about that? Is that better? Okay. That works, right? I think it's okay. I think this works. So sorry to keep you waiting. Let's continue. Losogi. So can everyone hear Geshe-la's voice all right? Okay, great. So first of all, greetings to all Dharma friends. Geshe-la hopes that you are all well and he hopes that you are all happy. So all of us are striving for this happiness. We all need this happiness. And so everything that we study in these lessons, right, it is aimed at accumulating the causes of that happiness. So an important thing when we have a gathering such as this to listen to the teachings is not to sort of direct the mind in its ordinary context. What this means is that if we have the same attitude for this type of activity that we have for our samsaric activities, then even if there are virtuous causes, those will be contaminated and they will not bring forth the desired results. And so then we could say that there was a kind of meeting. There was a meeting where the people attending that meeting were wondering, what are the causes of real or true happiness? I asked who was at this meeting. Sorry, that was a bit impertinent. So Geshe said it was some kind of a meeting of hundreds of, we could say, like scholarly people or well-educated people, some sort of conference where they were discussing the causes of happiness. Yeah. And so this was an actual conference that happened. It's not just a story. So some people were saying, well, we have to get rid of this idea of work, and we have to make sure that the majority of the population is able to spend their time in leisure, doing mostly activities they enjoy. And some people said, though, even if they are leisurely activities, if that's all they're doing, because they're spending too much time in those types of activities, actually, eventually they're going to get bored anyway. And then some people said, well, maybe we just make sure that people have enough to eat, they're comfortable, they can enjoy their food and so forth.
다 대화하고 그러와서 다 녀야를 리라오지래.
And so, right, if you are just like enjoying yourself eating food or something like that, eventually that gets a little bit stale, right? That gets a little bit boring.
다 단다 야시 마시 개체 뭐시네. 타미 타치에 다 강가 던지기 내서 강가 대시래 문드스.
So at the end of this kind of discussion, they realized, well, these leisurely activities, enjoying food and so forth, none of those things can kind of bring forth a lasting happiness. So maybe those are not real happiness. Lasting. I thought I said last. He's catching some English words, but not the full. So I didn't say last. I said lasting. At least I hope that's what I said.
다 타마 된다. 투모가 촌드라고 타미 타제 될. 다 대신을 하면 돼. 다 somba송보테 셀레소나 다 대신에네 되는데.
So at the end of this conference, they were kind of discussing different things as potential causes of happiness. And the conclusion that they came to is that the mind of kindness, bringing forth a mind of kindness, that's something that can lead to a longer lasting happiness.
다 소소가 셀 somba송보시도 되와지 요나. 노를 되와 있는데 셜런도와 있는데 모두 되와 있는데 던도도 되와 있는 가디나 셀레레지레 와스.
If we have a mind that is in a state of kindness, whether we're abiding alone by ourselves, whether we're meeting other human beings, whether we are meeting other sentient beings, animals, and so forth, that basis of kindness will lead to a long-lasting happiness.
다
So we see, right, that establishing that mind of kindness, this is actually very much related to the methods and things that we're always discussing in these classes, isn't it?
다 던지지 자 som바송보 자본나고 손주지 세이자 다 손주지 세 공바 있는 릴레 페바 셀레 페바 하고서로 다 추서 리졸레 페바 다 페바 다 되게 저기요.
And we know that the very most powerful mind of kindness is bodhicitta. And we know that if we bring forth bodhicitta, we will experience improved mental health. We will experience improved physical health. We will accumulate merits, and we will purify negativities, right? These are the myriad benefits.
다 셀레와 셀 뽑아 델리체가지 다 좋아요는 와요. 한번 된대요 말이지.
A source of hope for the mind, a source of resilience or courage for the mind. There is no more powerful than this mind of bodhicitta.
그냥 근데 수도 와서 할레비 기보시나요. 손주지 세치 공바 있는 다 가자도 들릴래봐 있는 오코스 로juk 파션도 그래.
So His Holiness the Dalai Lama says that with this mind of bodhicitta, even, one of the other benefits, even during times of happiness, when things are going well, this mind of bodhicitta acts as an antidote to pride and other afflictions.
다 강에 체질 나서 태요. 강에 나서 태비 깔아요. 손주지 셀을 포게서 손으지 또와 있는 로juk 매바다 뽑아 치는 거야도 강에를 좀 로juk 파션도 그래.
Similarly, when things are not going well, when we're encountering difficulties, if we are able to maintain thinking about bodhicitta, then the self-cherishing, selfish attitudes and so forth, these are dissipated, and the suffering arising from the difficulties is lessened.
다 대도 투밍아저 때스단 하고 근데 와서 전주 세계 손서 가르했어. 너가 마제가 받 세계 마주 받은 세계가 대적이 세근데 와서.
So what is the mind of bodhicitta actually thinking? Let's talk about this in kind of an active sense. We could think the mind of bodhicitta is constantly thinking, those beings as vast as the sky, as vast as space, may I constantly strive for their benefit, for their welfare.
다 델리 뽑아체가 델리 니바체가 세가와요 그래서 요 말이에요.
So what mind would be more courageous than that, right? What mind would be more powerful than that?
다 소소가 강에 나서 지금 강에 태되는 강에 집에도 고추 추도 안 하고 채놓고요. 그래서 균주.
And when we have this kind of vast mind of a bodhicitta, then what we'll see is like these kind of minor problems or annoyances, right? Those are kind of, the suffering from those is kind of just cleared away.
다 던지지 다 대지 강가로로 다 세계 체지 세계 예된다고 그래서 다 대지 상강좀 가고 제주하면서 뭐도 왔어.
So these are kind of the qualities of the mind. These are the things that we are studying, and so this really gives us reason for joy.
다 예적의 노고 멜로자 첨보 간대지마 이나에 긴 노를 내선다면 샤야도요.
This like wish-fulfilling jewel, right? It's like a mirror of wisdom. Our mind is like that, right? It can cognize it can reflect any phenomena or object.
이나요 어떤 내 좀버래 내 냠바래 야와셔야 만도
Mhm.
멜로도 들리나
But this
네
mirror-like quality, sorry, this mirror-like quality of the mind, it can't distinguish between good and bad, wholesome and unwholesome.
어다 마고면 내선들이 저기 사코 자지대야 없는데 와
And similarly, this mirror-like mind is not making plans for the future. It's this mirror-like quality of the mind. Sorry, it's not the part that's making plans for the future and so forth.
어다 컴퓨터 가제 뭐게 가제 야진로와 이나요 코노로 팔류와 이나 담만다 존이라 컴퓨터 노노라 내선 담만다 팔류는 치코 레카지아지 와레스
Yeah.
이나요 새 노지 코로 레카지아지 된다 니바디 와 말레스
And similarly, a computer, right? We can put all kinds of information, ideas, and so forth into the computer, but it doesn't have the capacity for thought or reflection that the mind does.
어다 내서 든지지한테 된다 다 노게 새도 사시 그 짜침보 가르먹게 가리나 야와 첨보치 쓰원디 와스
So we can see that in terms of kind of like the inner qualities of the mind and the qualities of external things or phenomena, right? There is a notable difference.
어다 든지지 새 코로 다 조어들에 델 로바 체키가 다 손에 소와 듯이 셈바 레바 일라셔바 센 로바 뭐야 다 대지가 슈잔네라 그다 요아리아도 그야레스
So we know that we have kind of the mind or consciousness, which is this main mind. And then along with that mind or consciousness, which is the main mind, we have the pancha sarvagaha. So that's the 5 omnipresent mental factors of feeling, vedana, discrimination, samjna, attention or mental engagement, manashikara, intention, and contact. So feeling, discrimination, attention, intention, and contact.
어다 대지 가가 세계 예된다고 세계 제친다고 내가 제키드레스
And so these 5 omnipresent factors, these are like semgileka chegindawachi.
세계 예대 세계 제친다마라
They are qualities of the mind. They are kind of things that allow the mind to function, if you will.
어다 시잘라 짜침보 가르먹게 가리나 대응한테 죽으면 있었더니 내가 다 대노지제 도요
So we talked about the difference between the inner phenomena of the mind and external phenomena, right? It's partly because these outer or external phenomena lack qualities such as these 5 omnipresent mental factors, that they can't function in the same amazing way that the mind does.
어다 모터서 다 어다 가빙원에 다 들어가로 자야지도 이서 같은 달래 대이스
So kind of with this information in mind and with really the intention to improve and to cultivate, let us take a moment to settle the body and the mind.
So 노도라 소바다 timballu게 대바누지 바얀도요 소바치
So any useless feelings, any unwholesome thoughts that may be obscuring the mind, just imagine that they are like clouds in the sky dissipated through the heat of the sun.
제외라 마셔바세 노가던다와 다 뚱바진 걸봐 대대진 대이서
Think without discursive thoughts, I will just rest in this vastness of the sky-like mind.
근데 뚱바티 응원에서 한번 롱가 니갈다 셈 사리 사시리바 동아 드리어 보지요 소바치
So as we relax into this vast expanse, we touch this aspect of the mind that is clear, knowing, empty.
세 살이 차 그게 통화 zon지다 예라 그 대원주한도 세뭐 어떤지 통화 zon지다 셀 가와도 대원주한도
This clear and knowing aspect of the mind, when we're able to touch that bare aspect, this brings forth a feeling of well-being, of joy.
세뭐 될 텐데 그 사실이 바될 파 자와이나요 계징아시가 계징아마도 심마 어다 텐데 자와이나요 다 되는 분도 선바지
When we rest into this clear and knowing nature of the mind, if we try to pinpoint some beginning point, some end point, some existent point, we will not be able to.
세텔라 되네 또비 나세대가 된 가로서 somba nuji tsani raya tene mandu sapaji.
Similarly, the self or the I that we designate based upon this mind, that self or that I is not findable at all.
Nesa tandiji ya iza, ane mari pa chara kandiji yinba yinayo, tene meba zoji yoba tiyo ta, seka chichi sapaji.
So if we understand that, then we can also understand that ignorance, whether the grosser form of ignorance or the more subtle form of ignorance, these are misapprehensions. They are not the mind's true nature.
Nesa tela tene ta, koyi nyo da cheju kandi ji yinayo, zawa ni meba zoji yoba tiyo ta, nesa yatsi mochi sapaji.
Because of these incredible qualities of the nature of the mind, then any problem of samsara, whether big or small, can be resolved through the power of this mind.
Nesa tandiji ya iza ta gawi ngone semi ya bote, ten tishuli ya chabi sapaji.
So think, therefore, with a joyful attitude, I will guide this mind towards what is wholesome, towards what is positive. And imagine as we recite the prayers that we are making this single-pointed request to the gurus, to the yidams or meditational deities, to all of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. We'll recite the prayers together.
Song Ye Chon De Ya Sha Kya Tu Ba La Sha Se Lo Je De Kya Su Ji Lo.
So I saw something flash about changing an audio setting. Is that something I have to do from my side, Dave, or are you able to do that? I have to do it from my side. Okay, let me see if I can do that. So I've clicked on the audio setting and I'm looking at the audio profile. And so I guess I should put it on not auto, original sound for musicians. Is that
Correct. Correct.
Sorry?
Correct. Yeah. Original sound for musicians.
All right. Let us try that. And then should I do high fidelity, echo cancellation, or stereo audio?
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Okay. All right. I will just leave it there. Yeah, so thank you. I wasn't sure how to do that. Let me just adjust our output. I hope so. So we'll see if that helps. I have adjusted the setting. Yeah, Geshe was asking what's happening. So I think what happens is when we do chanting, the computer gets confused and thinks that that's background noise, right? So hopefully with the adjusted setting, you'll be able to hear us better. You'll tell me when we finish the prayers.
Sure.
Emba sonje joden de beja shaja do wala chonzo lo chedo jasu chi
Demba chonden de
deje sheba da jomba yonda ba zobe sonje reba don shasu demba dewa
sheba
jite chemba shewo ndoye kalo jowa
lana me ba
Adon mino ji demba sonje jonden bejawa shaja do bala
chazelo chede kyazu. Is that a lot better? Okay, great, great. So let's do the mandala offering. Oh, Idam Guru Ratnam Bendala Refuge and Bodhicitta.
Sonje jido zojo jona la chonchu badu dane jasa dagi chishi jibe zono je jola
Benjir Sangye
Drova jo sonje jido zojo jona chonchu badu dane jasa dagi chishi jibe zono Jola bejo sonje drova
Chedan sogi chenam lai
Sonje badu dani
jasu
jasu
ji
jo
dagi chenyen gibe sonon gi jola penjir sangye roba sho. Oh, Jesus.
Oh yeah, ta ngan zum ya mli ya bo. Oh ta te ya pe chi chimbo chi tu yin song ba chi.
So we proceed with this thought of I'm going to take this human rebirth and I'm really going to make good use of it.
Oh ta ko ya ya shi bo tong ba so su ma no ji ko yi ja ji pa ro den do yi ta ji pi ta bo no ji chi re sa su ma no ji ta pe je tu yin song ba chi.
And so remember that the holy beings say that this human body is like a boat or a raft that can take us across this vast ocean of samsara. So think, I'm really going to use my human rebirth in the spirit of that analogy.
Oh ta ta ga se de ba yin na ne ayan de wa ga ten pa pa la ga su ma no ji re. Oh ta du nga ga sa ga ko ro yo pa ge shin da wo chang do ya re. Li de. Ta ga se ja ja ba yin na. Ne ko yi li ji za ko ka nge ga sa ge shin da wo ji re.
It's important to use it this way because, as Arya Deva says, if we don't use this body kind of in the correct way with the correct awareness, it will actually help to perpetuate the causes of samsara and suffering.
하고 살아와 다 전부 지수할 때라면 가지 이나 다 배제 여보 또 이나 요다 소소 강에 요조 보게 매봐줘야 그랬더니 다 나오지란 또 배제 또 해야 하래.
But if we use this body well, then it will be able to eliminate all of the causes of the perpetuation of suffering and samsara.
다 든지래. 다 든지지사 다 배제 여보 또야 될 다 세모 야발에 조조 당한조들이 달릴라고도기 스니리 좌도 세드 다 매봐서 그건데 손비도는 라이스.
So then to use this mind and body well in the best possible way, we want to get rid of mindsets that hinder that. And so one of the things that we need to get rid of is this biased attitude that holds some close and others distant.
다시 따야 되니 좌도 그 세매 비토니 뚜녀 세야보 지시 다니 띵거린 라이스.
So we're going to proceed with the meditation in a way that brings forth a neutral mind of equanimity as an antidote to these attitudes of attachment and aversion.
롱을 따와이나 롱기 녀를 따와이나 다 이제 생체 설을 따와이나요. 기고 매바시게 되니 좌도 세 잡본다고 들에도 손바.
If I examine myself, if I examine those close to me, if I examine other sentient beings, even those who may seem far away, I can see that so much of the causes of their suffering is this biased attitude which holds some beings close and others distant.
보이녀다 치즈 간데시나요. 아니 좋게. 다시 바보 쪼데 든지 세야 되는데 손바.
One of the principal creators of the problems, the conflicts within samsara, is this biased mind of attachment and aversion.
예수도 쓸었다가 이나는 다 대시지 그거야. 그래서 대시 때기 세야 돼. 니리 저도도 자기 세야 됐다. 좋은다고 잡은다고 그래도.
And accordingly, we understand that a mind that can contribute to the peace, to the happiness of oneself and others is a mind that is the antidote to these attitudes of holding some close and others distant.
로지에 관계 니가게 되시 다 될라되네 타투게 되시 제기 세세요 다대 할래야게 내서 지는
And this antidote is a mind that can contribute not only to the temporary peace and happiness of oneself and others, but also to that ultimate sense of peace and happiness.
우루소서이나이 동보 든지가 세드 예리 차도도 차이 세드 타심바지다 너네 손지가 공부했더니 될라되네 제 생체 요소다 든지도 자와시기
By first eliminating this biased mind of holding of the division between oneself and others, establishing that equanimity, then I will work for the welfare of others in the best possible way. To do that, I must achieve Buddhahood, full enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings.
소만노지 드텐데 드토그레스 가르레스는 예리 차도도 차이 세텔 자데체마 공비스 도지마도 자데체마 지주마도 소마지
Can I bring forth this mind of bodhicitta, this mind of striving towards the welfare of others? I definitely can, because its principal obstacle, this biased minds of attachment and aversion, holding some close and others distant, these have no basis whatsoever in reason. They have no truth behind them, only habituation.
뭐야 되지 이렇게 좋지
So we'll pause there. Can you guys hear the bell now? No, okay. Still some settings to tinker with. Yeah, we'll see. We'll have to see if we can do something about that. Let's look. Konso di kobgimen do sa.
오다 된다 든지인데 와서 오다 녀레가 논내라 녀리 차도가 치세트 가제 녀레 제바이네 제베 녀레 오 할레비 다 쳔보질 로야레스
In fact, it is said that when we cultivate this mind that is the antidote to the attachment to those close and the aversion to those distant, this can actually also become a practice of the paramita of generosity.
오다 제베 녀레 간디슨 로야레스나 문지비 샤지 좀바 사티 제베 제베 녀레 든 로야레스 그도스
Ale.
문지비 샤지 좀바 지바 샤비
Ale, and when we practice this mind, how is it a practice of generosity? Because it is said that cultivating this mind protects beings from fear. So it is the generosity of giving fearlessness.
오다 짐발은 카카 짐바 만다와 제야라 와스 오티는 문지비 샤지 좀바 스탕아로서 마도 tonrossed selina jipaga jipa sheke zote nyeri chodong sedre was.
So one of the four types of generosity is the generosity of giving fearlessness, and one of the main sort of causes of a fear in both ourselves and other sentient beings is these minds of attachment and aversion that hold some close and others distant.
So for
that reason, then, this mind is something that is very beneficial. It is something that is very good to practice. And so then, in order to be able to develop the mind in the ways that we discussed here, then we have to turn to the actual instructions on mind training. So I believe that we are on page 13 of Geshe Chekawa's text on the 7-point mind training. Specifically, I think we are at the section called commitments of mind training.
我呀，他按照做在一个啥些，他领导我去的话，我就得这个的话是。
And so when we talk about this particular Lojong or mind training, it's called the 7-point mind training because there are 7 sort of salient main points.
他得么样东嘛，有多么面着到了啦，是他面着这些么个，这个么些啥个意思？
So the first one is first train in the preliminaries. We won't go into that because we've gone over that a few times by now.
但你把你就上去写用啊，是你那个家本着我做的上去写你的嘞。
The next is a training in bodhicittas. These are the sort of king of practices.
他是把经验上去了的就啊。
And the third one is taking difficult or adverse conditions into the path.
他得就写罢了，他设计个牛来干的是做个嘞，他的给下的嘞。
The next one is how to practice in one lifetime.
嘛这里要别干了，多我干的是牛来这个的，嘛这里他们怕小孩子嘛人都别干了，牛来干的是做个的，他得去。
And then also remember, we have the 5 powers as they are practiced at the time during one's life, and we have the 5 powers as they are practiced at the time of death.
都一干了，这你们这得哪干对？呀，等你我把这边，我把乱就一切。
The next one, the 5th one, is the measure of having trained one's mind.
他罗呀，他给我选那嘞，你不选那嘞，家里那样，他罗就个原来他到原这个门对那，等你乱就啊，这我去。
And in a capsule, we can say the measure of having trained one's mind means whatever condition one meets, whether good or bad, our study and practice remains undisturbed. This is a sort of good analysis of if the mind has reached that measure of training.
当俺就地他妈的有死的。
And so we're at the very, very kind of end of that. Ale, nganso di damsi glemanso.
都是他牛我赢吧。
Ale, dasala.
一直是把的，也就特难就把一些吧呢。那这节的也就大里没有啊，大儿马到吧，老个的那些拉手经验学完呢，解冻拉手没写哇，经验的你老就个都是开始，老印度呢，老就一切也没。 대다른 저와 남편이 라바샤고.
nganso kawaye, sorry. 이래배. Ale, sorry, just figuring out where we are. Okay, so here we go. The root text says, if this can be done when distracted, you are proficient. A skilled rider will not fall from a horse even when distracted. Similarly, whenever adversity arises, such as sudden harm from people, if we do not feel anger but transform the adversity into a support for mind training, this is a measure of having trained the mind. Make an effort, therefore, and train to reach this level.
Yeah, so
this is, I was also struggling with it. Geshe said the root text as it appears in the Tibetan, if this can be done when distracted, you are proficient. It's actually, the language is quite archaic. It's not so easy. Yep. But here, right, the commentary illustrates what's being said here very nicely. A skilled rider will not fall from a horse even when distracted. So that means somebody who's very skilled, like a polo player or something like that, right? Even if their mind is distracted by other things, other events, they're able to stay on the horse in a steady way. But if you aren't familiar with horses, then if you get distracted, right, you could fall off, you could run into trouble. So like that, right, if we are a practitioner and if we look at the sort of horse as a little bit like the conditions of our lives, if when those difficult or distracting conditions arise, right, that our reaction to that difficulty is not immediately to give rise to anger, or even if some anger does arise, it remains controlled, it remains minute, right? Then we can still, with those conditions, train our mind. So we don't want the samsaric conditions, whether they are good, whether they are bad, to be able to function as distractions from our practice of training the mind. We want to remain with that practice like a rider with their mount.
Oh, yeah, that loju etc. Loju etc. Loju jila shi ta yinji. Yong sene, ta yong magiba maybe, ta da shuni jo. Bene loju wa shago.
Oh, the various measures. Sorry. The various measures of mastery are all signs of having trained the mind, but this does not imply that there is no need for further training. Continue to make an effort and train the mind even after these signs arise.
Oh, ta teji kanga loju ta nyole yabo yepi ta jire ma to. Oh, ta tendi jile chane ta nyole zo magini ta devi ke chamare.
So these signs are right, or these measures are all a sign that one has done well with the practice of training the mind, but it doesn't mean that the mind has been completely trained, right? It doesn't mean that you can stop practicing now.
Oh, ta chi ya chi ke jo se na mudin gude ma to ba ta shu shi ya chi mo ja ge ne da
until we actualize the Dharma jewel within our mind stream, at that point, right, we can start to pull back a little bit. Until we actualize the Dharma jewel, we will continue to need to train our mind.
Oh, kan de ta su ngi was to mo ta ne o tan gude to sar ta ne ga le chi ne de gis.
His Holiness the Dalai Lama often jokes that if I achieve true cessation, then finally I can relax a little bit, right? So His Holiness kind of recently he dropped a little hint about progressing through the path of accumulation to the path of preparation, and perhaps being able to approach the path of seeing in this lifetime. So that's really something very encouraging. And His Holiness has also said that he's now able to kind of perceive very clearly how the path to Buddhahood, to full enlightenment, is to be ascended.
So if
of course, we could also see His Holiness as already enlightened, as a manifestation of Arya Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha Chenrezi. But we can also understand that perhaps these manifestations are His Holiness trying to give us some hope of what is possible when we are steadfast in our study and practice. So in this way, we've completed number 5, which is the measure of having trained the mind. And now we come to the next one. And so we have 2 left in the set of 7. And so these are the commitments of mind training and the advice related to mind training. And so Geshe said he's just thinking off the top of his head. We may be proven wrong as we go in the text. He thinks there are 16 commitments of mind training. He remembers them as 16.
Oh yeah, what did you? That you know, Tombo. Chupa Lojong get on sit temba na. She desala ta de la chipala sopa suite. She desana Lojong kilon to mangawa. Tocho masho shure malhuago.
So the root text says train constant. So we're on the bottom of page 13, folks. The root text says train constantly in 3 basic principles. The 3 basic principles are not to transgress the mind training commitments, not to be reckless, and not to fall into partiality.
Oh, that don't see you be creature, don't see you in that tombo tella, and that is certain tombo chichi one royal amount of search yamares.
So Geshe said that when you can divide chutruk den so sum nang la drogiere.
Miss 지루 요하러 왔어.
Yeah.
지루고 눈에 돈보텔은 내서 써요.
Yeah.
뭐 집어라.
So Geshe said, don't misunderstand how the text is laid out. These 16 commitments of mind training, it's only the first that is encompassing these three basic principles. The others are on other themes.
다 돈보는 마코로 로자라.
Yeah.
나 로종와 이세네 라바타모 체더 세바 본데 somba 로조도 뎀비고네 소타도 도제테비 롱게 제타 키엔로이 라바노 마뇽바 수와샤고.
So avoid telling yourself that you are a practitioner of mind training who can ignore lesser precepts. Instead, with the intention of training the mind, guard all the precepts you have taken, from the vows of individual liberation through the commitments of the Vajrayana, and do not allow them to decline.
당이 로조뇨레 제가 요 눈도 지내라 하거서라. 다 손지가 순비가 다 내 맛이 내시 주세요. 돈지도 돈바.
Yeah.
다 대지 파 춘주지이나요. 다네. 다티 할래요 말에 세키존나 단일라니라. 제세체는 연이 된다고 말해.
So this is advice against the attitude to someone who thinks, well, I am a practitioner of the Lojong, the mind training teachings. Therefore, the Buddha's prohibitions about what not to do and the Buddha's exhortations as to what to do, especially as related to vows and commitments, because I'm practicing this high type of teaching, then I don't need to pay attention to those instructions. So of course, this is a mistaken attitude and we want to avoid that.
다 노아도 용거랬더니 노아 집보이는 건 예빠때 주가래. 예빠 요도 요하러 왔어. 인가와 용거 요하래.
And this isn't to say that we won't make mistakes as related to our vows and precepts. Most of us will make a mistake, but a mistake is not that powerful depending on the intention, right?
다 체세에서는 하려면 예빠 주고 서벌을 두고 요하래. 그래서 체세에서 하지 요. 체드세봐. 어때 할래요 말에 생각해보지.
And so what makes it heavy though is if we are kind of sort of reckless or dismissive of those precepts. If we're dismissive and then we make a mistake, then that mistake will be heavier.
페나티 안에서 야천 보칠 가리와서는 페나 게스도 결론이나. 짜지가 짜.
Yeah.
짜가 하고 그라스.
Yeah, 하고서.
짜지가 바주지도 키도 던들 슈바이나.
Yeah.
다가서 슈바이는 거기 빠도 용거로 왔어.
Yeah.
하고서라와.
하고서.
주고 요 말했어.
제.
자고서
Yeah.
그 파쇼데 나도 만나면 게자 말아와. 다가서 슈바이나요. 아니 야 빠지 용거 알았어.
So let's flesh out this discussion a little bit more. If we look at the vows of Shramaneres and Shramaneris, so that's novice monks and nuns, but also bhikshus and bhikshunis, so fully ordained monks and nuns, there is a prohibition against hitting, for example, a cow, an elephant, even a dog with a blade of grass. Even hitting them with a blade of grass is some sort of fault. So the first instance of this is the fault that arises merely from breaking that precept, merely from the monk or nun breaking that precept.
하고서라와 다 땡아줘서 야시워라. 짜짜지 바슈슈나 바줄슈나. 그는 난 나가 말에 내가 나자 용거 말아왔어.
So you might ask, well, why is that the case? Because if you think about like an elephant or a cow, for example, if you hit them with grass or a piece of straw, that's not really going to hurt them in any measurable physical way, is it? So then if you then think, well, then what the Buddha said about this doesn't make sense at all, and then you start hitting the cow with the blade of grass, then that relatively minor fault becomes heavier. So in that way, you have not just the karma from the transgression of not observing the precept, but you also have the sinful karma. So do people get triggered when I say the word sinful? You can tell me during the question and answer. Someone told me I should be using it, and here you would. So but it's not a sinful karma, right? But if one does it with this attitude of dismissing the precept, dismissing the teaching, then that karma becomes sinful. So there's one which is just a fault of not observing the precept, which is, a fault, and there's a sort of a negative accumulation, but then there's actually a non-virtuous action. And that is determined by hitting with the blade of grass the animal, thinking that the Buddha's pronouncement of this was not important. So this is the difference between the two. So it's kind of like a dismissal, a mind of dismissal towards what the precept is, and that's very negative. So we're now on the second. Avoid all forms of reckless behavior intended to demonstrate to others that you have no self-cherishing, such as chopping down powerful trees or befriending lepers. Take care not to conflict with the example of the masters of the Kadam tradition, founded upon the teachings of Geshe Chekawa at Racheng Monastery.
다 로족은 원래 가제 먹이 가제 세토고 인도도 지낼 하고 살아와. 다 시에바 초면받던지 남마다 어느 존나 안에 오냐 받은가.
So Geshe said that, thinking I study and practice the Dharma, but then not abiding by kind of like common sense things of society, right? Like maintaining a quarantine, cutting down trees, and so forth, right? This is meaningless. This is not something one should do.
다 던디 된데 뭐 용기 하래. 소가 로족 원래 취침보 속에 노노서 초면받더니 초기더니 뭐
So there's a lot of people who have a contrived practice of Lojong, of mind training, right? And their contrived practice of Lojong or mind training means they engage in unusual behavior, but that's not an actual measure of Lojong.
된디 바지. 다 선바. 슈레 말루마. 선바는 매 내가 제라 하이 내가 맞제 봐도. 쳐와라. 기라 충와라 녀봐도. 녀라 쇼라 달라 동와서 라서 봐 슈레와 토제 뽕라. 토제 좀발라 라보.
So number 3, avoid all forms of partiality, such as tolerating abuse from human beings, but not from non-human beings, respecting the powerful while disrespecting the weak, and loving one's friends, but hating enemies. Instead, apply the training universally.
어다대도 검토질 야대서 리라버랜도 와서 하고 살아와 다 로족 녀랭이네 지게요나 아니 제가 검바 있는 녀랭 간디시나 So
Geshe said, really, this is pointing out to what the true measure of mind training is, right? It's not patience that's specific to one group or another or high or low, right? It's a patience that one is able to maintain from all, during kind of difficult situations with all types of beings.
하고서래 어다 멀어져와 고타라 된다 뭐냐 레라고치라 다 소소 예쇼라 다 제바 데스 고토바 어느 소소 먹어와쇼라 다 제바 고마타 바디우라로.
So we can see that, right? Like even if we just take the human being categories, right? It's a lot easier to be patient with someone for who you like and for whom you have affection, who's close to you, than it is to be patient with someone who you find difficult, isn't it?
다요 멀어져와 다야 야쇼바도 다니 제바도 가리나 요바제 던돌메바 다니 많이 봐 슈레 많이 봐.
And also, we don't want to have a training in the practices of love and compassion and just have those exclusively for human beings, but dismiss love and compassion when it comes to other sentient beings like animals, right? That kind of a species sort of bias is also not appropriate.
We know that,
shifting between the body of a human being and the body of an animal, for example, is something that happens in a relatively short amount of time. And there's no human or animal that we could point to and say that they have never been close to us during some incarnation, right? So it's better to have this attitude that they are all close to us. Yeah, but of course, this mindset is not so easy to bring forth, and it can be especially challenging in secular societies where, for example, accepting past and future lifetimes, that's already a big step for many. So there is a story that Geshe wanted to tell about His Holiness the Dalai Lama's encounter with a scientist. And I think he was meeting the scientist in his laboratory or something like that.
가시 체리가 돈에라.
Mhm.
샤왕아마 매바 파체바 템보스주나
Mhm.
전소 킬레게레스 게제스티바레.
And as His Holiness was walking with the scientists through the laboratory, the scientists asked him if science was able to prove that past and future lifetimes were not a thing, if it was able to disprove reincarnation, would you accept that? And His Holiness said, of course, I would accept that.
야 근데 태조 매바 레텔 시워 승인에 쉬나도 이도 있어. 뭐 론소 두바 매바 때 레트자바레.
So His Holiness, kind of without reservation, he was able to state very clearly, if there was unequivocal scientific evidence that you were able to present, yes, of course I would accept this.
론소 근데 그세네 다 가시 야 전소 따지 뭐뭐서는 샤왕아마 예바지 시워 통선 전소 킬레게레스 말이야.
And then His Holiness said, if there was some sort of measurable way through science to demonstrate the possibility of past and future lifetimes, would you accept it?
다 기타다 레자마토는 까마카시에 대해서 거기 한국이로지 아레스.
And so it's said that at that time, the scientist kind of was reluctant to say anything. So he just kind of stayed there without saying anything for a time.
다 가레스 체리 걸어서 오커로 통다고 지어서 와서 뒤는 매는 건도 요아레스 라타.
So this does show that even scientists have their limitations, right? Because of kind of these rules that they have to abide by. This can establish a kind of biased attitude in their minds. So really, Dharma is essentially the way things really are. Right? It is the way things really are, the way of things in the world. So if science gives us an extra insight into something in accordance with the Dharma's principles, right, we should be able to accept.
So Geshe
is fairly confident to say that the presentation of the Four Noble Truths, the presentation of the 7-point cause and effect instruction, these sort of essential building blocks of the Buddhist teachings, these are not something that but if science could somehow present something that could unequivocally disprove an aspect of the practices of method or wisdom, then with an unbiased attitudes, right, we as Buddhists would have to consider and perhaps accept that. So, but Geshe said, of course, like when we talk about the coarsest aspect of physical phenomena, right, then there are some inconsistencies between science and Buddhism, and perhaps things are disproven. That's not the most important thing in his mind. Yeah. So I was asking Geshe, I was pressing him like what he actually means by that, right? Because I was curious. I said, so for example, would it be like how the world is shaped or the formation of the world or something like that? He said, yes. But also, in Buddhism, we have different beings perceiving things differently, right? So we can also look at it from that perspective. And even within the Buddhist presentations, there's inconsistencies about coarser aspects of the doctrine. For example, the layout of the world. If you look at how the layout of the world is talked about in the Dzu, the Abhidharma Kosha, this will very much be different from how that world formation is posited in the Kalachakra Tantra, for example. So even within the Buddhist teachings, there's differences. But that doesn't mean, right, that there are not kind of valuable and interesting things about how the elements form and how the world is formed within those texts. There are definitely things worth paying attention to. And there is one scholar, there is one scholar of the Buddha, the name escapes Geshe at the moment, but there is one scholar of the Buddha's teachings, you know, ancient, so we're talking like hundreds of years ago, who actually, when he was writing commentaries on the world formation, he talked about the elements coming together and a round sort of ball-shaped planet, very much in the way that science understands the world.
어다 깨자 못한도 갈래갈래 용거 간주 더 주게 시리가레스 넘벌레 동보 차비간에 더 주베제 돈이 다야 용기와레스.
And so when we talk about the formation of the world in the context of the Buddha's teachings, we 건다 센리 둘축세기레 they're the fundamental. What? Sorry, I missed that. So there are kind of atoms or particles which are made up of 6 constituents. Those are kind of like the basic building blocks of matter according to some of the Buddhist teachings. And so you know, so 4 of those would be particles related to earth, fire, wind, water, right? The elements. And then there is the element of space within that particle. And then there is a particle within that atom known as the wisdom particle. So Geshe said it's not exalted wisdom in the ordinary sense, but it's called the wisdom particle. And so it is said that on the basis of this particle and this constituents, then sort of all phenomena are unfolding. So we want to continue with the text. For Kedrup's sake. Well, I don't think it's for my sake. I hope it's for all of your sake as well. So remember this, these 3 points, these are all related to the first of the mind training commitments. So now we come to the second of the mind training commitments. And so number 2 is where it says the root text says on page 14. And these commitments of mind training are so valuable because they are really about practically how to live our lives, right? So the second of the commitments from the root text, change your attitude, but remain neutral. So if we're a true practitioner of the Buddha's teachings, what we have to transform is the mind. We want to decrease self-cherishing, anger, all of the branches, branch afflictions. That is our principal task. So change your attitude. That's exactly what that means. Reducing the afflictions. Yeah. So remain natural means not having weird expressions, weird ways of talking, weird physical manifestations, and so forth, but just remaining natural, remaining just like an ordinary person you would see in society. So there's another saying, Geshe said, that's not in the mind training text, but that relates to this. It says, even if one has the realizations of a deva, one's behavior should accord with those of ordinary human beings in society. And we see, right, that like the majority of the holy beings too, right, they possess very high realizations, but for the most part, they're behaving quite normally, right? But you have people who don't have any real inner realization, but they may be dressed up in special costumes, they make funny pronouncements or extreme physical gestures, and on that basis, maybe people think that they're realized, but of course, that's not the measure, right? Yeah.
This one, Tachibana, Sombangar, Mochiban Zabate, Dabi, Yechiba, Jela, Linga, Sheva, Chu, Chitanoton, Jaya and Rawa, Sotaba, Shade, Lojong Tonche, Nietsechula, and a Chechewashi, Shagis, you be Genji Matova, Mabashi, Shago.
Transform your attitude from one of self-cherishing to one of cherishing others, while ensuring that your actions of body and speech are in harmony with those of our Dharma companions. It is said that all mind training practices should involve making great progress, but with few outward indications. Mature your mind, therefore, in a way that is imperceptible to others. So Geshe said it's actually a very clear, you don't even need to say much here because the Don't speak of injured limbs. Do not say unpleasant things about others, whether this is pointing out disabilities such as blindness or spiritual flaws such as compromised ethical discipline.
So he,
we see the first says don't say unpleasant things, right? And so that shows us, right, that when we talk about the different types of non-virtue, we talk about non-virtue speech, things that are uttered from the mouth. And in fact, that is one of the easiest ways that we are accumulating negative karma. So Geshe is thinking of a story now about a teacher and a student as it relates to non-virtuous speech. And so this is a story about a student who was maybe a little bit difficult and a teacher who was becoming like frustrated by that. And so this story is from a time where there's actually different kind of, how do I say this, epochs kind of within samsara, and there's times within samsara where a cause that's accumulated ripens very quickly, like right in a very short period of time, whereas in the time we're in now, usually a cause ripens as a result in a longer period of time. Dul. Snake.
Yeah.
So this teacher was very strict. He was scolding his students frequently. And so one day, one of his students became really frustrated. And he said, like, my teacher has the temperament of a snake, right? He's angry like a snake. And we know, right, like in the Wheel of Life and things like that, the illustration for anger is the snake, right? Get to the end. And so in the scriptures, it says that from uttering that, right, this acted as the cause for that student to be reborn as a snake in a subsequent rebirth. So harsh speech, especially where one has an intention to look down on others and subsequently uses harsh words, right? This can be quite an accumulation of a heavy negative karma. So we need to be careful. Yeah, and of course, the karma will depend on intention, but also on the words that are used and their heaviness and so forth. But we need to be mindful here. And actually, not only should you not say abusive things to other human beings, but you also shouldn't use abusive words even with animals, actually. Chawa Segen den Sorwa. Shawa. Kale, sorry, kale drone. Then also nguntu jien kap jepane, then karisan gure. Yeah. Shamisagin.
rida tel rida se yares
Ale lo solo. Semchen Karina, Shamisagin Karina.
mimi rengol de tasane de yara shawa tani dua
Ale.
je tawo
Shawa dene.
ta shawa de rugu de yijra
Ale. So there, Geshe is saying that in the 8th chapter, sorry, it's unfamiliar terminology. In the 8th chapter of the Abhisamayalam Kara, there are there are stories of when the Buddha, Jiangshu Senpa Kapro,
of
of the Buddha when he was a bodhisattva, and he was taking the form of different beings that were kind of non-violent beings, like vegetarian beings, like rabbits and deer and so forth in the wilderness. So Ribong Laoson, Geshe said rabbit. Now he's questioning. Okay, so anyways, vegetarian animals of the grassy place, whether they were birds, deers, and so forth. Yeah. So these ridak, it's a word, I think it's a word that means herbivore. So these are peaceful beings that are abiding on the mountain. And the other word that Geshe said is like a carnivore. So those are the beings that sustain themselves through eating meat.
So the
point also of these stories that are given in that 8th chapter of the Abhisamayalam Kara is we don't know amongst the different types of animal beings if there are emanations of Buddhas, if there are emanations of bodhisattvas somewhere within there, right? So now Geshe wants to tell another story related to this. I asked for the story a little bit slow so that I can get the important points. He said we prepared this. Well, I hope so. So the last story was a little bit heavy. So Geshe wanted to give a story that was like a little bit more lighter, maybe a little bit more pleasant. So this is a story from Tibet, and there was a lama in a place in Tibet there who was giving teachings. And so because he would kind of travel and give many teachings, he built up like a vast following of students. And some of them, they were actually in places quite far away from where he dwelled.
And so then one day
one of those students who lived a little bit further away, who had very strong features, his face kind of always seemed to have a wrathful expression with kind of like a pointy nose and a furrowed brow and so forth. And he came to speak to the Lama. And so at that time, the student requested the Lama, can you give me an essential instruction, like a mantra or something that I should recite? And at the time when the student requested this, actually the Lama was very busy. He was trying to get his belongings and things together to go on his next Dharma trip. And in the story, Geshe says he thinks even it may have said that the Lama was about to get on his horse to ride it to his next destination. Yeah. So the Lama was a little bit annoyed because he was trying to get ready to leave, and then the student was very insistently, in a very annoying way, asking for this instruction. Then when he looked at the student, he looked at that furrowed brow, and it seemed like he kind of had this like very kind of, I don't know, demanding expression. So the Lama was a little bit annoyed. And so he said, okay, your mantra is the face like a lion. So a mouth and a nose like a lion. So a snow lion has a very prominent mouth and nose. So he said a mouth and a nose like a snow lion. So those were the words that he told them to recite, something like that. So the student did not pick up on the sarcasm. And having taken this as the cherished instruction of his teacher, he accumulated many, many booms, many sets of 100,000 recitations of this kind of like nose, mouth, lion face mantra recitation. And because he recited this with a mind of great faith for both the Lama and the instruction, it actually started to have a transformative effect upon his mind. So what happened is eventually he went back to his place, and as the student was dwelling in his place, a great pandemic, a great outbreak happened, something like a COVID-19 level of pandemic. So then, of course, the people in the area became desperate. There wasn't modern medicine and things like that. So really, out of desperation, they knew this Lama as they knew this student of the Lama as a fine meditator. So they went to him and they asked him for some kind of instruction to protect them. So what happened is that the Lama recited his mantra of kind of nose, mouth, lion face, and then spat on all of the people that came to see him. And from him reciting that mantra and spitting, those people became healed of the illness, actually. And so this student, he actually became a Lama himself, and he became very respected as a great healing master in that region. And eventually what happened is that pestilence, right, that illness, it spread across the land and even to the place where the student's Lama was from. And eventually that Lama, he himself became afflicted with the disease, and out of desperation he approached his former student because he had heard that he was able to heal people. So he was desperate, and of course, as we said, there wasn't modern medicine at this time, so he heard these stories about this great healer who is able to through this powerful mantra heal the illness. So then his former student kind of he sent a message, and his former student said, you can come and see me, and I'll try to help you. And then, of course, the Lama heard this kind of nose, mouth, lion face, and he was kind of completely blown away that his sarcastic words had transformed into that healing power. And not only that, but using the power of those words that he had meant in a sarcastic and an abusive way, the Lama was actually healed from the pestilence. So that's a story just illustrating the power of words. So the point here, right, is if one has a mind of faith and puts effort into applying the instructions, even if those instructions were a little bit strange, through that power of concentration and faith, then great things can happen. So we will leave aside our discussion of the 7-point mind training for now, and we will turn to our other text. So then we are looking at the 400 verses of Aryadeva, And I believe we are on verse number 294. 294.
샤자 김에 조제때 선본노지 치이도 메도 나와이 메도 나와이 인점바 디저 트비 줄루 마스.
So 294, the teaching of the Shakyas, Nigrantas, and Brahmins are perceived by the mind, the eye, and the ears. Thus, the subduer's teaching is subtle.
오다 치료 전부 써서는 먼저 알아듣는 용도와 샤자서는 노바 손집이 다 손집된 데가 르테지 김에바서 지위 누로 매비 치료지 아니 조제가 치에서 오 조제는 먼저 알아왔어.
So there are kind of three schools of thought that are being mentioned in this verse, right? So these are schools of thought of ancient India. The first is the thought of the Shakyas. So these are the Buddhist. The next one is the Nigrantas. So Geshe said Nigrantas are the naked ascetics. So I believe these were propounders of the Jain philosophy. And the final one is the Brahmas, the Brahmins, the observer of cleanliness. So the Brahmanas, like the Smarta Brahmanas. So it's talking about these three types of philosophical schools.
다 돼서 다 제반라고 가려야서나 소주된 데가 치대 저 세네 속에 야기네서 되레. 저 맞다 남는 여러와.
So when it says the subduer's teaching is subtle, so semre, this means that the subduer's teaching is mainly concerned with the mind.
다 니바테 다 메가.
Yeah. And then the next one is the eye, di chiropa chikro. So this is said to be, I think, the Nigrantas, right? The eye, because they are keeping this kind of visible asceticism.
다 선바테 조제가 치대 다 거로 비
And the ears is referring to the teaching of the Brahmanas, of the Brahmins, because they are mainly concerned with reciting the Vedas and mantras and things like that.
다 던지지 자 손지가 치대 때에서 세게 거 갈래체가 나고 다 전이라 아니 때에서 뉴아도 옛날에 때에서 릴라가 있다 다 모아되고 되기래라고 했습니다.
So this is explaining actually at the time, right, that the Nigrantas and the Brahmanas were more in terms of followers than those who were following the Shakya, who were following the Buddha's teaching. And this is said, it is because observable conduct of the eye, or things that are recited and heard by the ear, these are kind of easier to get a grasp of than this subtle teaching, which is aimed mainly at the mind.
다 녀석바데 저다 조제노라지 파제 시치 제바다 대제 지분 네. 노라치 파제 넘바 제바이.
So here we come to verse 295. Brahmin practices are said mainly to be an outward show. The practices of Nigrantas are said to be mainly stultifying. Can someone tell me what stultifying means? Anyone want it? Okay, maybe with Geshe's explanation it will become clear. I have no idea what that word means.
This one? 다 리치 됐더니 다 그렇게 시 쳐봐도 전에 다 다니면부터 들라 때는 계속 와이자 아니 오자자 맞잖아 다 되도 맞아 뭐야 가지고 와요다. 뭐 페이 절런도야 못하는 얘가 요래.
Yeah, so an outward show. So Geshe said this is speaking actually about the Brahmanas here. Don't get confused because we talked about mainly about the ear, but an outward show is because these kind of Vedic rituals, the clarity of the recitation is very important. The outer conduct of the offerings and so forth are made important. These are held by these Smarta Brahmins as being very, very important things. And this is also a little bit of an admonishment to Buddhism, because our practice can also become very much of an outward display focused on the words, the performance of the ritual. Yeah.
And also
to be very clear, right? This is not necessarily a fault-finding verse, right? It is talking about the characteristics of the particular dharma of the Brahmanas and these performance of rituals, the abiding of cleanliness. Geshe said that mindfulness of those things can be, right, a powerful way to kind of practice. So we don't want to be totally dismissive.
다 릴강에 가세 제바이는 다 디더던 그래. 다 치조 대레 사지 리지 무야래. 다 대지 노아 첨보지래.
So the di nipadirwa
다 가리나면 아주
Gramse
타마타마
Marwa.
진도와서
Yeah.
다 릴강에 때망 맹아 때바도 하고서라. 다 들리서는 담만 강에 돼야.
So the Nigrantas are said to be mainly stultifying. Did someone put, I thought I saw someone put in a definition of that word. But anyways, how Geshe is explaining the Tibetan word that is there is that the Nigrantas are mainly observing a kind of asceticism. And here the text is more critical, that an extreme asceticism or kind of bodily mortification, this is actually not necessarily a positive practice.
어딘지 봤지? 다 지다 리바 롱와레 조제 기파시와다 대제 녀무 롱와레 지고와라 제완절나사.
Brahmanas are revered because they adopt the orthodox. Nigrantas are pitied because they adopt the deluded.
하고서래. 지다 리바 롱와레 조제 기파시와다 대제 녀무 롱와레 지고와라 제완절. 하고서
Jenda chik drotsarebe. Dungel legi.
딜레소이.
Ale, mare. So tema ni losong.
알레. 지다 하고서라.
Yeah.
다 때냐 다니엠보도 던디라테니 다 프레치를 다 기바체워도 던디 제가요나.
Yeah.
다 칭년내는 로기 던디이나.
Yeah.
델리주테와 그거레스.
Yeah. Dila tsewa gogeres kaichani.
미칭년내 셰키이나.
Mhm.
델리주테와 그거라와스 다치 가르세가 다가제 다 칭년내 비도abo 미나요. 그렇게 기바도 던디요바이나.
Yeah. So Geshe said that here, talking about the Nigrantas to be pitied because they adopted the deluded, right, through this extreme of mortification, then one should actually, as a practitioner of the Dharma, then one should actually have some compassion for them, right, that they fell into a kind of extreme.
하고서래 다 된다 그냥 가지야 시치나래 노간조치나래 그게 너무 슈체는 로야기 치시이나 델은 이지시야기 다 이지 저거를 마도 다 보겠대.
And so this actually can be a kind of compassion that we have in place no matter what religious system we talk about, not just those of ancient India. We can also talk about any practice of religion which causes a person's afflictions to increase, right? That is a situation for which we should have compassion.
그래서 다 베나 내일 타반데가 요아레스 고로수. 타바토 베첸데 릴레 강에 트키나. 하고서래 다 데는 가서 다 그게 니지야지래 마도 저 니지시야지래 마도 따다래요.
So, for example, those who have this wish for liberation from samsara, and they think that the way to get rid of to be free of samsara is through like tapas, through extreme mortification and asceticism. We have compassion for them a little bit because of that extreme asceticism, but mostly because that is not actually going to function as a cause of liberation.
다니엠보 지보를 차네 데데바도. 릴강에 지보테네 다 보게 됐던리자 데데바이나. 타바티 노용라요 말레스.
And similarly, although some of those practices such as reciting mantras and shastras and so forth may be beneficial for the mind, they still cannot act as a cause for liberation.
다티치 다 타마디다.
Loso.
둥아 레저 너무 지다 치스 먼저와 대지 세와 레저는 너무 이제 치마이.
297. Suffering is a maturation, and thus is not virtuous. Similarly, birth too is not virtuous, being a maturation of actions.
달릴라 둥아 라보테 그 말에서 둥아 용한테 세왕감이 레저 너무 근디부치레.
Yeah. And so, we don't need to create more suffering for ourselves through mortifying ourselves. We are already experiencing all of the sufferings of birth and this ordinary body due to the karma that is constantly ripening.
달릴라 강에테 봐 존지 다 치는 거예요 말에 그 레저 진디부치레 마도
And so self-mortification, that doesn't become a practice of dharma. At the most, it will become a ripening of karma, right? So you're not going to get further by doing that. In brief, Tathagatas explain virtue as non-violence, so ahimsa, and emptiness as nirvana. Here, there are only these two.
다 지금 님보 가르래서는 다 안에 채워 예를 채워 마셔 봐. 대도 따와 땡주 님보 들어다.
So the really pointing to the very heart, the very essence of the Dharma is the conduct of non-harmfulness, chupa tung tawa,
야시와 채워 매봐도 따와
and the
땡주
view
님보
of
들어서.
dependent arising.
다 손지가 치 용수대 되는 거야.
So all of the Buddha's dharmas actually can be traced back to these two, the conduct of non-harmfulness and the view of dependent arising.
다 가마치자와 고쇼 아슐로카니데 테마루자가 있어.
So Geshe said that he realized we're at half past, so it's time for questions, but he'll just ask you to bear with him so that we can just read these last two verses and finish up the chapter.
로쇼 지테 토제라 시사진도 되잖아. 대이 두바시베제 쳇라 공개 두반저사.
299. To ordinary people, their own position, like their birthplace, is attractive. Why would you find attractive that which precludes it?
땅아로서디안로 머사데 서도 세이나 소소 사자테 소소 시사텔 사자텔 다 가보 지내다 보게 자치모서 요라와.
So we can see that people born into this world, right? We do have this kind of like attachment. We feel that there's some sort of attractive quality, right, about the country and the place, the locale where we were born. We have an attachment to it.
다 델링이네 가보 지금 코와 타도를 두비고 타 야쇼 때 또만이 시바데는 델가보지쇼스.
But rather than kind of finding attractive that which precludes our birth into this cycle of samsara, much better would it be to find attractive that which can free us from samsara, such as teachings on emptiness.
다 담아들어. 리피트는 예레죠. 로데 레반데빌로 냐마
300. The intelligent who seek what is good adopt what is worthwhile even from others. Does the sun not belong to all on earth who have sight?
땅아로서 더니야 요조 자침부 츠키 이자 레비차 요래 야슈체는도야 레비차 내서 여보
Oh yeah.
그래서 다 요사 노치지고 많이 봐. 이시인들의 핸디인들의 그러보게 요래 슈체는도야 빼강아치 레고 그래.
So the intelligent who seek what is good adopt what is worthwhile even from others. That means that if we observe beings who are abandoning what should be abandoned and taking up what is good, whether they are Christian, whether they are Hindu, and so forth, we should kind of observe and emulate those positive qualities. It doesn't necessarily matter, right, what their label is.
다 님한테 뭐 관계 배제도 뭐 관계 코페를 가셔야 와서 다 대누지 요가데 가르이나 배제도 그래.
So what is wholesome is something that all of us can benefit from, no matter from what system of religion or spirituality. Just as when the sun shines in the sky, it is something that we can all benefit from, regardless of our affiliation.
다 대하고서라 마도 다 쇼리 저거진 어때 야보이나 키멜레 말 소소데 누자이나 키레네 되는 대야보 말해.
So if we hold to like a particular religious tradition and then we see negative things happening in that and we insist that those are positive because of a bias, and we see people from other religious traditions doing things that are positive, behaving in a really ethical way, but we can't appreciate that because they're not of the same religion. That's a little bit of a silly mindset, isn't it? So then it's a verse. We don't have this in the English, unfortunately, but it is just a verse marking the conclusion of this 12th chapter of the 400 verses of Arya Deva. So Geshe said, we've gone through this chapter. We kind of just touched on, we didn't do a kind of like maybe scrutinizing teaching on all the aspects, but hopefully you have a better idea of the view, what should be practiced according to Arya Deva. Yes, and so then what we'll do next is actually we'll go on to the next chapter, to chapter 13 in the second half of these classes. So we covered a lot of essential points. We engaged in a lot of virtue. So let us take a moment to dedicate those merits. And of course, after the dedication, if you need to get on with your day, feel free. If you'd like to stick around for questions, feel free. Jongjo semjo rinpoche maje bano
제조르지 제와 냠바 메바용 고네 고도 배와 니 다와 rumboje 마제 바나 제조르지 제와 냠바 메바용 고네 고도 배와 장배 바오 제다 제바도 군도 상보 대연 대저대 대다 공기 제서달로저 개와 대다 도제라도 드선 셰베 개와 도제제 모와 강라 초등아바 다기 개베 사와 니거죠 zambo jeje rado
이제 강리 수업도 수업하지 이게 저하나 때네 단도냐 고한들 샤왕이 막 아니지나요 파셔와지.
So through the roots of virtue that myself and others have accumulated, may all of the roots of negativity, of evil activities within samsara be cleared away. Those who are engaged in evil plans and evil thoughts and evil actions, may all of these be completely purified and cleared away. May all six types of sentient beings within samsara be able to bring forth the minds of love and compassion so that the sun of happiness may shine upon all of them without differentiation. Think I am so fortunate to be able to study and practice these profound teachings on bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness in this life. So we'll pause there. I want to adjust the volume just a bit so that we can hear folks more easily, hear their question. Please go ahead.
I just want to say that I feel like I'm so not there. I just feel like it was so like, the standard is so high that how do I reach that? Kind of made me feel like, the standard is so high. I'll never be able, because I know that I struggle with anger and I struggle with all these things. And I'm just like feeling like, the bar is just so high that I'll not get there.
I'll put this to Geshe, but I had a friend who said, be aspirational, not judgmental. So that's how I try to.
That changes my mind a little bit.
Ganso tsedi halepe topo chikre dua dene ganso di kandasabagore perna lojong ginangla chatsangwa ganso che mitubiagi nes dabo chikre karinsan ganso controlangi yores ganso digbasagi yores dene tsedi tets to trane ganso pet led to gimenduski so achikyoresa.
Ya tata tambonile tokido sachi amarawas.
So the first thing to understand is that there's nobody who just meets this measure, this standard right from the beginning. Nobody. But if we want to be happy, that we can't give up. We have to identify which of the afflictions is the strongest for us. And what can we do even to just decrease that somewhat? what are the problems that trigger us? And what can we do to transform those even just a little bit? And so of this feeling of being overwhelmed, Geshe said he's sure it's not just specific to you, right? This is something that so many of us experience. It's not easy because the standard is very high and we're not going to be able to meet it from the beginning. But what it is it's a map of the destination where we want to go. So step by step, we work towards that. Yeah. Hard mainly because of this factor of habituation. For so many of our previous lifetimes, we're accustomed to behavior of doing exactly the opposite to this. And because of that force of habituation, when we try to strive towards these wholesome practices, it actually seems harder, but it maybe is just lack of habituation. But what you need to know is that if you never make the effort to strive towards it in this lifetime, next lifetime, you're going to end up right where you were in this one. There won't be any improvement. So we have to try our best. And Geshe can assure you that if you're able to practice even just a little bit of the essence of these instructions, you'll be moving towards a better direction. So every day, just set aside a little bit of time. Doesn't have to be a long time, just a little bit of time to review, contemplate these practices, and maybe try to meditate on them. Just a few minutes every day. You'll see a difference. And so people sometimes say those people who really sort of stridently persevered in their practice, they said that once you get to a certain point, realizations that seemed like they were hundreds of years in the future, you actually experience them in that very lifetime. So a little bit of a long answer, but the bottom line is it's important to try. It's important to try.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Anybody else? Yes, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a question about the precept of always speaking calmly. Somebody in the room I'm in said, how can you possibly always speak calmly to a 2-year-old?
Yeah, nganso the ngak gi damsik di nganso kadi ne tsik lolo dabo chik drogres yene so pugulo ni dabo chik dabo jago chuna kadi ne lolo kechishia tets kale kabore duasa. Yeah, so dabo jagana, so pala amala yena puku kadi ne lo ni dabo chik yena kadi ne lolo kechishia pentop menduas dabo chik ro. So Geshe says he still thinks the principle carries over, which is rather than like shouting at the 2-year-old, you could think what kind of games he or she likes, what kind of things will help them to soothe themselves, for example. Yeah, and actually, if you think about it in the right way and you challenge yourself with how you interact with the child can actually be the basis for an accumulation of great virtue for yourself. So there's something related to that Geshe will share more about this in the future. I think I see a hand, Manoshi, maybe. Go ahead.
Hello, yes, thank you. I just wondered, in terms of that, there was one of the verses in the first text, it was about the different level, the Brahmins, the Nigrantas,
yeah,
and so on and so forth. So they said the Brahmin practice is mainly to be outward show and so on. So, and I know in Brahmin practice, cleanliness and so on is very emphasized. In the lower tantras, Buddhist tantras, so like White Tara and so on, with Medicine Buddha, and so I'm not sure. I know White Tara perhaps, but in the lower tantras, cleanliness is also emphasized. So I wondered if Geshe could talk a bit about that, why it would be, and how to work with that sort of thing. as opposed to just using it as an outward show, right?
No, it's interesting. It's interesting. Nganso chirna nganso ji japa nangla nganso di bramsegi chudi konso tets so chirula yimpa dabochik utsu jagi dua roa dene chichena pentokshe da mepa dabochi gi koju yore roa yine nganso chagyu kaplula nganso bramse nangshin halepe tsama nyargores halepe kala mixel nyargores ane chirtang chigi chupa halepe ke champore duas dene di bramse dan kepar kandis chigyuresa.
Mara ta tedu dembores. O ngazu te nyemu pe chuchen roi jelen roi yone te noar da siores chado.
So the first thing to understand here is why there might be a critique of the conduct of the brahmanas. It's not that keeping cleanliness and keeping this good behavior is wrong. It's wrong if it leads to an increase in the afflictions.
O ngazu ina chi korol noa ya mare te yenju le leka cheto noa chatan pa levita ne mo yares.
Agi.
Ngazu chi noa du ya mar was. Akosara
Yeah.
ina chi roto machine nela.
Yeah.
Ta nyo da jama cheba mo yares.
In the same way, there's many things in Buddhism, many teachings in Buddhism that are not innately wrong whatsoever from their own side, but people practice them in a way that can actually be detrimental to themselves, right? Like what is beneficial can be made harmful through intention.
This one, ta ngazu ina chi bara shaji do teji na bochi nyoleche. O ta nika chi seki wondu. Hakosara was o ta tandi sono tone deba ina techi bo sono tone noar was.
So if one is a yogi or a yogini of the Kriya Tantra, of the action tantra, and one is abiding by a pure diet and engaging in the conduct of cleanliness, just thinking like, I want to practice this well so that I can get some sort of reward or be happy in this lifetime, then, right, that practice can become a hindrance. If our practice of the cleanliness, the outer conduct aspect of Kriya Tantra, acts as something that is increasing the 8 worldly dharmas within our mind, then there is something wrong with how we are practicing it. But if we are using this outer conduct as a skillful means, through abiding in cleanliness with the mindset of allowing us to purify karma, of allowing us to accumulate merit, and abiding in that discipline as a method of decreasing the afflictions, then, right, we are practicing that in a positive way. So there's nothing wrong with the cleanliness aspect of it in itself.
This way, ota nyemu me wa shepala tumani chibo gojane le tu ya tu ko chidulinda wo chi pa ya ta ke chimendo ko.
So right, ultimately we understand what gets rid of the afflictions is this meditation on emptiness, but that's hard for us to do, right? So we have these kind of auxiliary practices which can be skillful means to help us accumulate merit, which are like the water and the fertilizer, which will allow the realization of emptiness to bloom.
Yeah,
So remember, like any virtuous practice without that mindfulness and intention can degenerate. Remember the story that we told of Lord Atisha, where he saw somebody circumambulating the stupa, and he said, circumambulating stupas is nice, but how much better would it be if you actually practice Dharma, right? I think we told that story last week. Yeah. So we can understand these practices of cleanliness of outer conduct in a similar way. Yeah. So if we engage with these restrictions, these cleanliness restrictions of Kriya Tantra, with an attitude that through mindfully maintaining those, this is a way to accumulate merit and train the mind, that clean conduct will not become the cause of a fault. Rather, it will help us to purify and accumulate merit.
And
And also keep in mind that these verses don't have to be understood in a way that we are denigrating the brahmanas and so forth, right? They can be understood in a way that we are denigrating when that practice is done in such a way that increases pride rather than reduces the afflictions. Certainly there are good practitioners there too.
But the
wrong view that is explicitly pointed out, which Geshe thinks is pretty unequivocal, is that through mortification of the flesh that we can somehow purify our negative karma. This is widely kind of understood as a completely wrong view in Buddhism. So of course, Milarepa built the tower a couple times. We engage in a lot of prostrations that might hurt our knees, but also we are doing this with a different kind of mindset. So the mindset or the intention is very important. So did that answer your question, Manoshi?
Yes, I think so. Mostly. So I guess I think it was a very good answer actually, but I just wondered, so when we're doing this action of cleanliness in terms of in the context of a Kriya Tantra, would it be that we imagine that we're cleaning our mind while we're maintaining that purity of outer purity? Could that be how we approach it? Sorry.
Dene perna nganso chagyu nyamlen chepe kapura nganso sangma netso sangma nyarya di nganso sem samatso egi chedi re samlo tangna dene chok yabo jogi rebesa. Yes, no, that's a great way to think about it. That's one way that we could direct our mind. Yeah. But ultimately, right, purifying the mind and observing these purities, it's just keeping the discipline of the practice, and doing that allows us to water, to fertilize the minds of bodhicitta and wisdom realizing emptiness. So if we don't keep that kind of intention that what we're doing, whether observing the precepts of cleanliness, any practice that we do, that it is for the purpose of arising bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness, no matter how beautifully, how perfectly we accomplish that outer practice, it won't mean much. Yeah, so all of these auxiliary practices, they are really aimed at reinforcing the root things that we need to establish: renunciation or definite emergence, bodhicitta, and wisdom realizing emptiness. Even accumulation and purification, right? These are auxiliary practices. They're extremely important, but they're still auxiliary practices that are to bring forth these three principal aspects of the path. And then behind those, we have the rituals of cleanliness and so forth.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. I see a hand. Is it Martha, maybe? Yeah, go ahead, Martha.
Good morning.
Good morning. Geshe said it's good afternoon. No, she's right. It's still morning. It's still 10 minutes in the morning. So you are right.
I'm sorry, my English.
It's okay. No, we're very happy to take your question. No problem.
Okay, talking about bodhicitta. So bodhicitta is the desire that everybody is free from suffering. Okay, so the bodhicitta, we study bodhicitta because we have ego, and the ego is, I think, the opposite of bodhicitta. But what happened, for example, when somebody hurts you or make you something, then you become angry, and then you react, and maybe you fight, ¿verdad? So you are breaking the vow of bodhicitta, because in that moment you lose your mind, and you are not desiring the best for the other person because you are acting with your ego. So what you do after that, when you realize, oh my God, I do that again, and
what are you supposed to do? Yep. Okay, I got your question. Yep. Nganso chitang jamshub gi sem nganso di kandesa gore jamshub sem lebela nganso di semshin tamshe konso dungele drewagi samso chi gogires roa. Dene di samso di dapo samlo tangna dene korangi kind of dokchok di rang chenzin gisem chigyores roa ane ngansu di jangchu gisem ba dompa shuna ngansu khadi ne di jangchu gisem dang rewadi dabuchik nyargo gre duas ine samsam michi ngansu nuna michi ngansu kyunje chena dene ngansu halepe lunglangne dene ngansu rang chenzin la tene konso nepa keagi chawa yamena chik labgire duas dene ngansu di jangchu sembe dompa dabuchik chaksares roa dene ngansu notru didapo shorna dene dijela kare chegoresa
다 때도 미디야 덴버로 왔을 때도 되냐 레 동버서는 뭐 모질 때인데 용기 와레스 덴버레스.
So of course Geshe said this is an experience that all of us as beginners, right? Sometimes we will fall into this mistake.
다 이나요 다 동바동 던지 녀레 다 니팔에서 넘어도 손세 telatiene. 네세 쉬지 뭐다 뭐냐지요 말레스. 같이 뭐.
So we might not be able to maintain our bodhisattva vow perfectly in the beginning. But as the minimum training, as the easier training, we make sure, even if we react, we don't hold on to a harmful intention towards others. So don't hold to that wish to harm the other within your mind. Try to let go of that. And of course, in the heat of anger, that might not be possible, but when the anger has subsided a bit, really make the determination to not hold on to the wish to harm that person you're upset with. And then when our mind is more relaxed, we can think back, we can reflect back to the thing that we did, and we can develop a feeling of regret, and that will help us purify the transgression. And then once we have kind of purified that transgression, then we just reestablish our determination to continue in the practice, and we try harder next time. But Geshe said, it's not something that you should feel bad about, because what you said to us is the experience that most of us have and will continue to have until we reach that measure of mind training. But as a first practice, please, the advice to everybody would be, don't hold on to that harmful intent to wish harm on the person who hurt you. If we can let go of holding on to that harmful intent, this is a very good beginning point of practice. And that harmful intent, right? It's not going to be sure whether we're actually going to get revenge on the other person or not. But one thing we can be sure of is that the longer we hold on to that harmful intent, the more causes of difficulties for ourselves we accumulate. It's definitely going to harm us, even if it doesn't harm the other person. Look at the state of the world right now. It's because of the various powers, the various people not being able to give up this mind of harmful intention towards each other. That's really what it stems from. And Marta will come to more discussion of this exact question, this exact issue, as we continue with the classes on this text of the Lojong. Really, the mind training and the taking of vows is to just slowly help us to back away from these negative habits and decrease them somewhat. And then eventually we come to a point where they can be cleared away. It is said that, even those with vows and even the lower levels of bodhisattvas, they still sometimes get angry, right? So we can't expect that us ordinary beings are never going to be angry at all, but we can try to do better, right? Did that answer your question, Marta?
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Gracias.
De nada. Is there anyone else? Any other questions, Dave, before we go?
Yes. There's a question coming in from Facebook.
Sure.
Well, actually, there's two questions, and they're both kind of related.
Okay.
The first one, let's say, is an extension of it's not is the phrase not speaking badly of injured limbs or something like that. So somebody asked me to ask on their behalf, having criticized somebody who is harmful, pointing out the harm that somebody was doing, and then realizing, okay, I've just harmed myself, basically. So I think Marta's, how do we purify that? But I think the other part of it is how do we go about correcting other people's mistakes? How do we help people to improve themselves?
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
And then the second part is from another person in a cultural context or social context where people are continuously gossiping and criticizing others, and you decide to refrain from doing that, you kind of disappear from conversation. You become somebody who, you don't know how to fit in anymore. What do we do?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let's take the first two together, Dave, and then we'll get Geshe's answer for the third one about gossip. Nganso the tambo di nganso di wampo kunjen din so kunje machia rwa tongchung machia gi netzel chik yore rwa di pet kunje machia gi netzel dabo chik du rwa ine nganso kadi yene kunje machena mi yaru tangya kandes chik tabche chegres mi konso netsu duksha denso par pangya kandes utsuja gore. So the Geshe-la's answer to questions number 1 and 2 related to the thing about injured limbs and how do we help people improve and correct their mistakes, Geshe-la said, it's an excellent question, but it's come too early because as we continue with the subsequent parts of the text, this will be dealt with. But he'll give a brief answer in the meantime. And actually, as what you'll see as we come closer to the end of the text is that there's an instruction where it says that, thinking that you are so good and holy, and then just refraining from stopping others from harmful action when you can, don't do that. So in fact, it deals with this very issue. You'll see as we move through the commentary. So in fact, this instruction is one of the very commitments of mind training.
So that's
criticizing someone who said, because I'm studying and I'm a practitioner of the mind training, then I'm just kind of above all of the fray. And when there's harmful activities going on, I'm just not going to say anything about that, because if I do, I could look judgmental and people might criticize me. That's actually pointed out as a mistaken behavior as we go later through the text. A true practitioner, when he or she is able, if they have the occasion to see somebody engaged in harmful behavior and they are somehow able to lessen it or stop it, in fact, they should try to take steps to stop it. And so we can think also, if we're a parent, right? You can think of the parent, the mom or dad that who, because they love their kids, they just don't discipline them at all and they let them get away with anything. But we know that in the long run, right, those children are not going to be benefited. They could become spoiled and that could create problems for them later in life. So in that case, it's the parent's responsibility, right, not to remain aloof, but to kind of interrupt the negative behavior of the children. So if we have a means to reduce or interrupt the harm as a Dharma practitioner, that's our responsibility. But if there's nothing that we can really do, then obsessing over it is not helpful at all. So in that case, it could be good to step back.
어다 손지고 로조도 녀래 체 토의 셰비가 질 멋지게 자왕년바 뭐뭐 세비 그세 세로 집이가라 이들 소설리 돈이 제지 세기 주소스
Again.
손지
Yeah.
손지 세바 임비가라
Yeah, yeah.
멋지 세기 주소스
So remember the story, right, of the Buddha in his past life as a bodhisattva when he was on the ship with all of the merchants, and there was somebody on that ship who was a murderer intending to kill everybody and to steal all of their possessions. And the bodhisattva, the Buddha, when he was a bodhisattva, he actually killed the would-be murderer to prevent that harm. So that's a very illustrative story.
어다 자왕년바 첨보지 거비 된데 소설배도 알리도 노고도스
And also knowing that one may have a negative karmic reaction from that, but willing to take that risk because one wants to stop a much greater evil.
바슈 먼저서 뭐뭐 수샤바레 코로 랭년바 뭐뭐지 거 도바레
So in that way, you know, through that one negative action, but much greater is the lives, the many hundreds of lives that he was able to protect. Sorry, 추가 연결치 타디드로나 되기로.
미미 다 대시 hil라 된다 저거 발라고 말해. 하고 살아.
Yeah, 하고서. So I was just telling Geshe there's still one more question as part of these three.
네 아버지 뉴르도
Sorry. So nanso nakildi roa nanso chomegyo ki kechedi kadine kecha mashena denenganso chitso ginangula tets kensa chagiredu akarinsena kecha sheka dabochi migi kunje dang chapsi dang denso gi koloredua nanso kadine joja denso madrona nanso di chitso ma depa gi mi dabochi chagiredusa.
매 텔레이나 이코노야 보시 커니다 예승인의 정보사시에 주로 왔어.
Yeah, so Geshe said that in terms of that point about not participating in the gossip or in those types of conversations and maybe being on the outside of society because of that, but Geshe said you can still participate with in the conversation, but with the motivation that you try to put it in a more positive direction rather than feeding the negativity.
어떤 간조이나 좀 저기 소소 개와대서 야서 아마도나 만유르도 야래까 맞아 그래서 가디노 슈리사워시에는 다 되는서 개와뉴르도 그러was.
And speech is really important to be mindful of. There's an exhortation that don't take what little merits you have and kind of degenerate those merits through heedlessness. And this is especially through our speech. You know, we work so hard to accumulate what is positive that if we just lose it through like some mindless words, right, that is really, really unfortunate.
Geshe Chekawa 시에 요아레스. Geshe 비칼 다스 야 소소 정보쇼는 줄 알게자 하고 살아.
Yeah. Geshe thinks there's always a way into a conversation. Maybe you won't be the main person in the conversation, but there's always a way to drop something positive into a conversation.
다 슈리사워제 드네 담만다시에 다 대대 받아야 뭐 되도 요아마스.
You know, but really, like if we're sort of compelled into a conversation that's like really biased, really prejudiced, or like completely negative, then you know we have to step back because that's not beneficial at all.
Okay.
All
I have
right.
another, yeah. So yeah, I have one more question.
Yes.
About mortification.
Yes.
The example, maybe the first example that we may have all heard of is a monk in Vietnam setting himself on fire, but this also happening in Tibet.
Yeah.
What is the Dharma perspective on that?
Yes. Wow. Heavy question to finish with today. Nganso sosogi lu kange tearwa denedi chedang gelwa dabochi greduas ine Vietnam dang pela trapa mambochi korong sogi supo denso metra tanson di korla kandes samlo tanguresa.
야 대dembo레스. 다 텔레존 뭐 요아레스도.
So Geshe said that it's true, right? It would seem to be opposed, and there's many different ways that we could think about this phenomenon.
하고 살아. 다대 컨트롤 로그 돈을 다 버게 잘 막아내라. 다 컨트롤 로그 돈을 대지요나. 다 졸라치 뭐지도 요아레스.
So if the monks who did that out of a mind of anger or with a negative intent, then absolutely that is a negative action.
하고 살아. 대노와 치모치래.
And it would be a great, grave mistake from their side.
다 배대 아버스 차는 손지게 때마 sen지게 대시 강가돈 대와 진도 다 대야버 차는 다 땡대 배도 진용거래 소노톤에 대제와 얘네 다요 땡대 코로나 배도 진도가.
But If the action was out of a motivation of knowing there is nothing else one could do, and this particular action is done for the sake of contributing to the longevity of the Buddha's teachings and contributing to the freedom to practice religion in the land of Tibet, and if it was done with a very, very pure intention, then there could be some benefit.
So the
Buddha's teaching exists for the very purpose of contributing to the peace and happiness of sentient beings. So if one's intention is connected to that, then even this seemingly difficult thing, it might be a force for positive. But if it's just a blind nationalism, if it's just done out of some affiliation to one's particular ethnic group or something like that, then Geshe says, yeah, you couldn't make it. It would be very difficult to see some benefit. So just for the sake of like to some cause, like some nationalist ideology or some kind of for one's particular ethnic group and doing it just for that sake, then it would be hard to find any benefit in that action. And Geshe said, actually, like, we can't really sit back and say, we have to be very careful in saying that it's positive or negative, because like we don't know what the intention was in these people's minds, and probably there were different intentions, so we have to consider that as well. Yeah.
Another question.
Okay.
Somebody's read a text that said that committing suicide is less karmically harmful than killing someone else. Is that true?
Okay. Rangjingi sea le mi jendag sea la digpa yanga rebes. Per la mi jendag sea na jiko tets jiko sapo soso sea na tets jiko nyunga direbesa. Geshe thinks yes, one could say that. Yeah, one could say that. You know, namgin rangjin sea tets digpa. But just to clarify, suicide is normally regarded as a negative action. It is normally regarded as a negative action. But like Geshe said, like if you had to just to illustrate the heavy and the lightness, imagine you were in a situation where you had to either kill yourself or kill someone else. Killing yourself would be the lighter karma than killing someone else. But killing oneself is still a very heavy negative deed. Yeah, it is considered a heavy negative deed. We're ending on a cheerful note today. My goodness.
Good practical questions.
Yeah. Yeah, Samsara is a complicated place these days, I guess. So Geshe said I shouldn't discourage people from asking the not so happy questions, right? We have to take all the questions. So it's all right. It is all right.
That's it, I think.
Oh, that's it, I think. Okay, well, thank you everyone so much for joining us. Maybe we'll see you next week, and in the meantime, enjoy your Sunday. And so Geshe said, you know, go proceed with your day joyfully, and then having like listened and studied today, you know, think about what you can do. Maybe look at the text again, think about these things again to improve in your practice. Okay. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.